Leo watched the expression on Caleb's face, a mixture of bravado and confusion, and offered a reassuring smile. He told him it was perfectly fine. Beginners weren't expected to know the terminology. He suggested they head out onto the floor to try it out. A young woman working at the pro shop handed over a set of protective gear and asked if Leo wanted his personal bow brought out. Leo politely declined for the moment, explaining he wouldn't need it just yet, and then led Caleb toward the stairs. The 10 and 20-yard ranges were on the second floor. Before the full expanse came into view, Caleb could hear the rhythmic thud of arrows hitting targets. Though people spoke in low tones, the atmosphere was considerably more subdued than at most other sporting venues. It was a weekend, so the lanes were fairly busy, with archers at the line and others waiting their turn on the benches behind them. An employee in the range's uniform spotted Leo and gave him a friendly wave. Leo returned the greeting and requested a lane for 5 sets of arrows. The employee told them lane 11 should be free shortly, as the current archer was on his last set. Caleb followed Leo deeper into the hall, his gaze sweeping over the other shooters. Some had tight groupings of arrows clustered in the center of their targets. Others were a disaster, with stray shafts dotting the wall and even the floor. What caught Caleb's eye was the person currently shooting in lane 11. It was a high school-aged kid, short and so lean he looked almost fragile. Just as Caleb watched, the boy drew the bowstring back with unshakable steadiness, narrowed his eyes, and released. The arrow flew with swift, confident force and buried itself in the bullseye. Caleb let out an impressed whistle. The sound made the boy turn his head. A look of delighted surprise crossed his face as he exclaimed that it was his mentor. What a coincidence. Caleb, of course, knew the title wasn't meant for him. He shot a sideways glance at Leo, a silent commentary on his friend already taking on apprentices. Leo himself seemed taken aback, asking the young man, Ricky, if he didn't have midterms the following week. Ricky grinned and shuffled over to them, scratching the back of his neck. He confirmed that he did, but insisted this was his way of balancing work and play. His eyes landed on Caleb, and he asked if this was another one of Leo's students. Leo explained that Caleb was a friend he had brought along to try it out. He then clarified for Caleb's benefit that Ricky was a sophomore at their old high school. He'd met him at the range a while back when the kid knew nothing, and feeling a connection, had offered to teach him some of the basics. Ricky, beaming with pride, began to regale Caleb with tales of his mentor's popularity at the Phoenix Archery Club. He claimed there was a long line of people hoping to be taught by Leo, but so far he was the only one. He recited what the range manager, a man named Russ, often said. Anyone at the club who could shoot better than Leo wasn't half as good looking, and there was simply no one better looking. He even recounted a recent popular archer poll where he'd sneakily submitted a photo of Leo, which had won by a landslide. As Ricky continued his endless stream of praise for his mentor, Caleb started to feel a headache coming on. The kid's hero worship made it sound like high schoolers these days had far too little homework. Caleb couldn't help but interject, remarking that from Ricky's description, it sounded like his mentor got by on his looks. He added that a man should be defined by his skill. Ricky immediately bristled, ready to defend his mentor's honor. Seeing another wave of adulation about to crest, Leo quickly stepped in. He told Ricky to go ahead and finish his last set, as they were waiting for the lane. That settled the matter, and Ricky returned to the shooting line. Perhaps Leo's presence added a bit of pressure, because none of his next 9 arrows found the bullseye again. When the set was finished, a range employee moved forward to methodically clear the target. Ricky returned, looking sheepish, and glanced apologetically at Leo. Leo just smiled and told him he'd been rushing it a bit. When he turned back, Caleb was already at the line, bow in hand, eager to start. While Ricky had been shooting, Leo had helped Caleb strap on the arm guard and finger tab. Caleb held his arm out, letting Leo make the adjustments, his attention fixed on Ricky's form to distract himself. He had thought it looked simple enough. It wasn't until he tried to nock an arrow himself that he realized just watching wasn't enough. Leo stepped up beside him. He steadied the back of the arrow with one hand while pointing to the middle of the bowstring with the other. He explained that there was a nocking point there, and Caleb needed to clip the tail of the arrow onto it until he heard a distinct click. Caleb wasn't slow. He did as instructed and felt the nock snap into place. Leo asked if he was sure it was secure, emphasizing that he should have felt it lock in. Just as Caleb was about to release his grip to let Leo check, Leo's other hand covered his fingers on the arrow nock. He pressed firmly, and Caleb felt a vibration run through both the arrow and the string. Leo let go, looked up, and smiled, explaining that was the feeling he was looking for. Caleb turned his head away, subtly flexing the fingers that had just been held. They felt strangely stiff. Leo, oblivious to his friend's momentary discomfort, continued his lesson. He tapped the bow's riser, explaining the most common method was the Moranian release. He pointed out that the arrow rested on the left side of the bow, just below a small clicker. Under Leo's guidance, Caleb settled into position and shot him an questioning look. Leo gave a slight nod, confirming the posture was mostly correct, and told him to take a shot just to get a feel for it. Then he stepped back. Caleb drew the string, aimed for the bullseye, and let go. He blinked at the empty target in front of him, then turned to Leo with a look of pure innocence, asking where the arrow had gone. Leo suppressed a laugh and gestured to the side. An arrow was firmly planted in the outer ring of the adjacent target. Caleb managed to swallow his retort, clearing his throat and ignoring the loud snicker from the high schooler nearby. He humbly asked Leo what he'd done wrong, mentioning that his aim with darts was usually pretty solid. He insisted he'd been lined up perfectly, so he couldn't understand how it had gone so far off course. Leo bent down, pulled an arrow from the quiver on the floor, and handed it to him. He told Caleb to get back into his stance, and he would show him the problem. Caleb knocked the arrow, raised the bow, took a deep breath, and a warm body pressed against his back, enveloping him, one hand covering his bow hand, the other his drawing hand. Caleb held his breath, nearly choking on it. Standing far apart, their heights had seemed comparable, but up close it was clear Leo was a good half-head taller. Leo's voice, a soothing, resonant murmur, was right next to his ear. He instructed Caleb to bring his drawing hand in tighter, anchoring it under his chin, while keeping his forearm relaxed. His right hand gently adjusted Caleb's, the warmth of his breath brushing against Caleb's neck. He noted that Caleb was leaning too far forward. Caleb felt so tense he might as well have been the arrow itself, ready to be launched. Fearing Leo would notice his reaction, he remained perfectly still, a rigid statue. With a soft sigh, Leo gently took Caleb's chin and tilted his head back slightly. He told him not to lean into the string, but to shift his center of gravity back a little. Once satisfied with the posture, he reminded him to relax his fingers on the release and try again. The 22-pound bow was not easy for a beginner like Caleb to handle. Whether from holding the draw too long or from his own full-body tension, his hand began to tremble. Leo stopped him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He admitted it was his fault for making him hold the position too long, which caused muscle fatigue. He offered to take the shot himself and told Caleb to relax his grip. He took hold of the bow's riser while his other hand took the drawn string from Caleb. With his hands now free, Caleb felt utterly useless. A wooden post caught in Leo's embrace as he held the drawn bow. He couldn't see Leo's expression, only feel the sudden tension in the muscles of his back, followed by the powerful, deep thrum of the released string. The arrow shot forward, but fell short, clattering to the floor before it even reached the target. Leo was speechless for a moment, then managed to say that the knock hadn't been set properly. As if waking from a dream, Caleb took the opportunity to step out of the embrace, both chiding himself and feeling a surge of embarrassment. He claimed he'd forgotten in his haste. He said he thought he understood now and wanted to try again on his own. Caleb had always been athletic. After a few self-corrections, he started to get the hang of it. His arrows began to cluster within the scoring rings, no longer flying all over the range. After he had shot through 4 sets, Leo asked if he needed a break, questioning if his arm was sore. Caleb rolled his shoulders and gave an okay sign. He felt fine and asked if this was the last set. Leo remarked knowingly that he might feel fine now, but tomorrow he might not be able to lift his arm. He held up a bottle of water he'd retrieved from a nearby bench. He suggested a water break. At the mention of it, Caleb did feel thirsty. He'd been so absorbed he hadn't even noticed Leo slip away to buy drinks. He accepted the bottle with a thank you and took a few long swallows. Leo opened another bottle for himself, taking a sip before saying with a smile that he hadn't known what Caleb liked to drink, so he'd just gotten mineral water. Caleb thought for a moment, then replied that he liked pretty much any beverage except mineral water. Seeing Leo's momentarily stunned expression, he burst out laughing. He admitted he was joking and complimented Leo on being so thoughtful and considerate, adding that his future girlfriend would be very lucky. Leo squinted slightly as he took another sip of water, offering a small smile but no words. A brief silence fell between them, and Caleb couldn't shake the feeling he'd said something wrong. He cleared his throat and looked around, asking where the kid had gone. Leo answered casually that he was likely talking about Ricky, and that kids like him couldn't sit still for long. He had probably gone to check out one of the other ranges. When Caleb asked about other ranges, Leo explained that this was the indoor facility, but downstairs there was an outdoor range for distances of 30 yards and up. Caleb gestured toward his own 10-yard target. His interest piqued. He asked if it was true what the manager had said about Leo being able to shoot 50 yards. Leo answered modestly that 50 yards was a distance he was comfortable with, though he had tried shooting from as far as 90. He admitted, however, that his accuracy wasn't consistent at that range. Given Leo's typically humble nature, Caleb took this conservative statement with a grain of salt. He pulled his last arrow from the quiver, his enthusiasm renewed. He declared that after this last set, they should go check out Leo's home turf. After finishing all 5 sets, Caleb was lightly sweating. He felt a pleasant, unfamiliar looseness in his muscles, a sensation that reminded him how long it had been since he'd really exercised. Leo led him to return the bow and gear. He asked the young woman at the counter to retrieve his personal bow. She teased him, asking if watching his friend had made him antsy to shoot himself. She disappeared into a back room and returned a moment later with a sleek, black longbow, which she handed to Leo. Caleb's eyes lit up. He commented on how different and cool Leo's bow looked compared to the standard rentals. The woman explained with a smile that it was his personal bow. Of course, it would be different from the club's generic recurves. She mentioned that most long-term members eventually bought their own and stored them at the range. Leo, meeting Caleb's bright, curious gaze, generously held the bow out for him. Caleb took it carefully, running his fingers over the string and turning it over in his hands. He didn't know much about archery equipment, but he could tell this bow was exquisitely crafted, solid and well-made. A thought occurred to him and he asked what its draw weight was. 55 pounds, Leo replied. Caleb's mouth twitched. He had been struggling with a bow that was less than half that strength. Leo saw his expression and knew exactly what he was thinking. He chuckled, telling him not to worry. He'd started out just the same and had progressed gradually. He explained that 55 pounds wasn't even considered particularly high among experienced archers. Competitive recurve archery was about precision, and a higher draw weight ensured a faster arrow, a flatter trajectory, and less interference from the elements. He assured Caleb that if he kept at it, he'd soon be able to draw a bow like his. Caleb clapped him on the shoulder, gratefully accepting the encouragement. He said he understood, and now it was his turn to watch Leo shoot. Just as Leo had predicted, no sooner had they stepped out the back door onto the outdoor range than Ricky materialized from a corner. He rushed over, buzzing with excitement, and launched into a rapid-fire monologue. He declared that he knew his mentor wouldn't be able to resist. He pointed out that lanes 6 and 7 were open and urged them to hurry over. Then he added that a really skilled shooter had shown up today, someone who seemed to know Russ, the manager. The man had been shooting at 50 yards all morning. Ricky admitted he was good, but of course not quite as good as his mentor. Leo and Caleb exchanged a look. Both suspected it was the middle-aged man in glasses they had seen when they first arrived. Ricky was still chattering away, saying that the man had seemed very interested when he heard Leo was his mentor. He'd told the man that Leo was just there with a friend and didn't plan to shoot, which had seemed to disappoint him. Ricky speculated that the man was there to challenge Leo's top dog status at Phoenix Archery, pointing out that he was in lane 5. He started to suggest that Leo should, before realizing Leo was walking in the opposite direction and calling out that he was going the wrong way. Leo turned back with a gentle smile and asked Ricky if he remembered what he had said he was doing there today. Ricky suddenly looked a little nervous, swallowing hard before answering that he was there to hang out with his friend. Leo's smile didn't waver. He leaned in close to Ricky and said quietly that he wasn't there to cause trouble. Then he straightened up and told Caleb, who was looking around, that the outdoor range seemed quiet today, so the lanes past 10 should be empty. Caleb, being the more mature of the two, didn't join in Ricky's goading. Seeing that Leo had no interest in the other shooter, he simply nodded and followed him. Ricky scratched his head, looked back and forth between the two, and then ran to catch up, still calling out to his mentor. A 50-yard distance might be a short sprint, but from the perspective of a novice archer like Caleb, it looked incredibly challenging. Leo put on his gear, drew an arrow from the quiver at his feet, and expertly nocked it. The longbow described a graceful arc in the air. Leo's focus was fixed on the distant target, the breeze ruffling the hair on his forehead and revealing the sharp, handsome line of his profile. He drew the string, and without much aiming or adjustment, released it decisively. The string vibrated with a deep, powerful thrum. Caleb barely registered the arrow's flight before he saw it quivering steadily in the center of the bullseye. He let out another whistle of admiration. Ricky, standing beside him, adopted the air of a seasoned veteran, looking down on Caleb's amazement. He commented nonchalantly that this was just his mentor's basic skill, and it wouldn't be surprising if he shot a perfect score for the whole set. And just as he'd said, Leo finished the set with all 10 arrows clustered tightly within the 10 ring. At first, Caleb offered words of praise, but after a while, he grew numb to the spectacle. After 2 sets, Leo turned back and asked if he was getting bored, offering him a chance to try. Caleb waved his hands in refusal. He said there was no need. He could already see the outcome. Leo responded with a rare flash of mischief, admitting he was joking. He told Caleb that even if he wanted to try, he couldn't. With his current physical condition, Attempting to draw a 55-pound bow would probably result in a pulled muscle or worse. Caleb didn't appreciate that comment. As a grown man, he objected to having his fitness questioned. He retorted that Leo didn't exactly have a physically demanding job either, so there couldn't be that much difference between them. Leo calmly stated that he had been working out consistently every week since college, and had even done specific muscle training for archery. He then observed that Caleb probably hadn't exercised in a long time, noting that he looked thinner than he had in high school. Caleb paused. It was true, he hadn't exercised in a long time. In fact, he hadn't been interested in doing much of anything for a long time. He still saw himself as the athletic, physically capable person he had been in high school, and sometimes he struggled to accept reality. Just then, his phone rang. He pulled it out and saw it was an unknown number. He answered the call, confirming his identity. He listened for a moment, his expression shifting, before agreeing to meet later that day. He said he would contact the person shortly and then ended the call. Leo asked perceptively if something had come up. Caleb frowned slightly. He hesitated, then confessed a half-truth. He explained that his next job was far from his parents' house, so he was planning to rent an apartment. He had an appointment to see a place tomorrow. But the realtor had just called to say the landlord was leaving town, and the only time to see it was between 4 and 5 o'clock today. Leo's expression shifted, but he didn't press for more details. He glanced at his watch and stated, without leaving room for argument, that it was already after 3 and he would drive him there. Caleb felt a little embarrassed and started to refuse, but couldn't find the right words when faced with Leo's steady gaze. He ended up just mumbling his thanks. Leo smiled and sighed softly, remarking that Caleb's politeness made them seem like strangers. Caleb just raised an eyebrow innocently and clapped him on the shoulder, offering to buy him dinner that night as a thank you. Leo's lips curved into a smile. He returned the friendly pat on the shoulder and said it was time to go. When they arrived at the apartment complex, the real estate agent was already waiting. He apologized to Caleb for the last-minute change of plans and then led them into the building. He glanced between the two of them and asked if they were planning to be roommates. Caleb laughed and said no, explaining that Leo was just there to offer a second opinion. A one-bedroom would hardly be enough for 2 people. The agent readily agreed, acknowledging that the apartment was on the smaller side but perfect for 1 person, with a good layout and great light. As they rode the elevator up, Caleb learned from the agent that the owner had originally bought the apartment for her son, who worked nearby. But shortly after, her son was transferred to another city, so the furnished apartment went up for rent. It had only been briefly occupied by 1 short-term tenant and was still in excellent condition. After the viewing, Caleb was quite satisfied. He turned to Leo and asked for his opinion. Leo agreed that, all things considered, it was a good find. Caleb was hesitant to commit immediately, wanting to compare it with 2 other places he had seen online. The agent, sensing his indecision, pressed his advantage. He told Caleb that an apartment in this condition wouldn't stay on the market for long, mentioning that another agent had shown it just that morning. He added with a laugh that renting wasn't a life-altering decision like buying a house, so a little decisiveness was a good thing. Caleb was amused by his salesmanship. After a moment's thought, he made up his mind. He told the agent he was a smooth talker and that he would take his advice and rent the place. The agent was efficient and immediately contacted the landlord. By the time Caleb had finished all the paperwork at the real estate office, night had fallen. He apologized to Leo, saying he thought signing a lease would be quick, but it had taken much longer than expected. He then insisted on taking him to dinner as promised. Leo, looking entirely unbothered, smiled and asked what he felt like eating. Caleb replied that he should be the one asking that question. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through restaurant listings, noting that there were plenty of options nearby. He held the phone out for Leo to choose. Just then, a notification sound chimed from the phone. Leo, whose eyes were on the screen, glanced at the message preview before politely looking away and handing the phone back to Caleb. He mentioned that he had a new message. Caleb took the phone and felt a wave of embarrassment. The message was from Wendy, a girl he hadn't spoken to much recently. Her text asked why he hadn't been in touch for days, and if he wasn't worried she might have gone missing. For some reason, Caleb felt a pang of guilt and glanced at Leo, then mentally chided himself for his foolishness. Being this close to Leo again blurred the lines between his dreams and reality. Wendy, apparently not getting an immediate response, sent another message. She wrote that she'd read online that if you suddenly stop giving daily attention to someone you're pursuing, they'll realize how important you are. She asked why he wasn't following the script. If she didn't contact him, did he just forget she existed? Caleb almost laughed out loud at her dramatic flair. He was smiling down at the screen, typing a reply, when Leo's voice came from above. He asked if Caleb liked German food. Caleb looked up from his half-typed message, taking a second to process. He replied that he did. He ate everything. Leo, who had apparently found a restaurant on his own phone, showed him the screen. It was a well-known German beer hall with high ratings. Caleb wasn't picky about food, so he agreed without hesitation. Leo smiled and gave his back a gentle push, suggesting they should go before it got crowded. Caleb stuffed his phone back into his pocket and hurried to catch up. The beer hall Leo had picked was clearly popular. When they arrived, the place was nearly full, with only 2 seats left at the bar. Caleb opened the menu and winced. Leo bluntly remarked that it seemed a bit expensive. But Caleb had already promised to treat him, so he couldn't back down now. He told Leo to order whatever he wanted, insisting that he could afford one meal. Leo smiled without a word, propped his chin on his hand as he perused the menu, and then called over a server. He started pointing, ordering one dish after another. Finally, he burst out laughing and told the server he was just kidding, and that he would be paying. Caleb protested, asking if Leo was looking down on him. Leo assured him that wasn't it at all. He clarified it wasn't out of pity, but rather a form of financial support from someone with a job to someone who was about to be unemployed. Caleb insisted that he had said he would pay, and that his reputation was on the line. Leo eventually relented with a laugh. After their playful argument, a brief silence fell between them. Caleb took a sip of water, his eyes on the chef expertly carving meat behind the bar. He suddenly asked if Leo wasn't curious. Leo glanced at him, asking what he meant. Caleb gave a self-deprecating smile. He pointed out that Leo's comment about him being about to be unemployed meant he hadn't believed his earlier excuse for moving. He wondered aloud if Leo wasn't curious why he had quit his job and was moving out on his own. He wasn't a fool. He had caught the implication in Leo's words. Leo also took a sip of water, his gaze fixed ahead. He replied that since Caleb had clearly offered him a flimsy excuse, he saw no point in pressing for the real reason. Caleb turned to look at him. Leo turned as well, and their eyes met. Caleb quickly looked away. Leo continued to watch him, his tone gentle. He said that honestly, he wasn't very concerned with the why of most things. What happened, happened. He only hoped that Caleb was happy. But, he added, judging by Caleb's concern over whether he believed him, it was clear that Caleb himself couldn't let it go. This meant that even though he had made this decision, he wasn't happy about it. Leo finished by saying he didn't know how to help, and for that he was sorry. Caleb's heart gave a heavy thud. He quickly coughed into his fist and forced a laugh. He asked why Leo was apologizing to him, remarking that he was still the same as he'd always been. Leo asked with genuine interest what he had been like before. Caleb just wagged a finger with a smile, saying he didn't repeat compliments, and that he'd already answered that question at the class reunion. Leo tilted his head, drumming his fingers on the table as he watched him thoughtfully. He asked if this was the second time that day Caleb had dodged one of his questions. Caleb choked on his water, feeling a warmth rise in his cheeks. Fortunately, the server arrived with their food just then, saving him. Bratwurst, pork knuckle, short ribs, sirloin, pork belly, a seafood platter. Caleb hadn't paid close attention to Leo's order and was stunned by the mountain of food that covered the bar. The server lifted the lid off the grill set in front of them, which was already glowing with hot charcoal, and began skillfully arranging slices of meat. Through the rising smoke, Caleb asked loudly if Leo thought they could finish all of this. Leo looked puzzled, asking if it was a lot, and wondered if Caleb had a small appetite. Caleb protested that his appetite was fine, but it was all meat. He asked if Leo wouldn't get sick of it. Leo's simple reply was that he wouldn't. Caleb could only sigh in resignation. It turned out that Leo, having spent years in the States, was a true carnivore. He effortlessly polished off a large portion of the grilled meat. After eating, he commented to Caleb that it was no wonder he had so little muscle mass now, and jokingly asked if he was trying a vegetarian diet like some young women. Caleb almost let a curse slip out but managed to restrain himself to maintain his composure. He assured Leo that his height and weight were perfectly standard. He then added, with genuine sincerity, that you really couldn't judge a book by its cover. In his memory, Leo had always been the refined, intellectual type. He never would have expected this. Leo explained that in college, his coursework was demanding and he also made time for the gym, so he burned a lot of energy and got used to eating high-calorie, high-protein foods. Caleb nodded, fiddling with his water glass. He asked abruptly if, with his credentials, Leo had a lot of girls pursuing him in college. Leo answered honestly that there hadn't been that many. He said everyone was busy with their studies and internships, so there wasn't much energy for anything else. Caleb teased him, saying that meant there were at least some. He asked how many he had dated. None. Caleb thought he had misheard. He raised an eyebrow in disbelief, looking Leo up and down. Not a single one. He asked if Leo was still hung up on Sarah. Leo looked utterly baffled. He asked when he had ever been hung up on Sarah. Caleb knew Leo wasn't a liar, which made him even more confused. He frowned, saying it was unbelievable that someone with his qualities had remained single all this time. He had assumed Leo had a crush on Sarah in high school, and that was why. Leo asked incredulously what he had done in high school that made Caleb think he liked Sarah. Caleb replied simply that he had done a lot. Leo picked up his glass and took a drink, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he said that matters of the heart had nothing to do with external factors. It was about not having met the right person. He then turned the tables, asking Caleb to share his dating history for comparison. Now it was Caleb's turn to feel thirsty. Technically, he did have a dating history, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to talk about it openly. On a strange impulse, he laughed and said that unfortunately, he didn't have any history to offer either. Leo propped his chin on his hand, tilting his head slightly as he looked at him. He asked if there was nothing in the past tense, and what about the present tense? Caleb's heart nearly leaped out of his throat. He scanned Leo's face, but seeing only polite curiosity, he relaxed and replied that Leo was conducting quite the background check on him. He confirmed that he was currently single and asked if that satisfied him. Leo laughed. He apologized, saying he had thought Caleb and Wendy. He explained that she had been quite forward at the reunion, and since they seemed to be in touch, he had assumed something was going on. Caleb waved a dismissive hand. He said she was just playing around, and he didn't have those kinds of feelings for her. He then declared that they were being boring, constantly trying to set up classmates. He suggested they change the subject. Leo readily agreed and switched topics, asking what Caleb's plans were now. Caleb shrugged, saying he had no plans. He would spend the next week moving, and once he was settled, he would figure out the next step. He looked at Leo and asked if he thought he was being irrational. He admitted that whether it was quitting his job, moving, or choosing an apartment, he often just did things on impulse and often regretted them shortly after. Leo was silent for a moment. He then said he couldn't judge his actions as right or wrong because he wasn't him. But as a friend, he said whether Caleb was moving, looking for a job, or regretting it all later and needing to cry, he could always call him. Caleb laughed and gently punched him on the shoulder, saying he wouldn't be crying. He raised his glass and clinked it against Leo's. "Thanks," he said. In the end, Caleb didn't succeed in paying for the meal. Leo had smoothly excused himself to go to the restroom and settled the bill in advance. When Caleb found out, Leo calmly explained that since Caleb had eaten so little, he couldn't possibly let him pay. After a futile argument, Caleb surrendered and simply transferred half the money to Leo through a banking app, declaring it a compromise. Leo just sighed softly. Caleb thought to himself, "You don't understand." After returning home, Caleb began to pack. He didn't have much to take. Some clothes, books, and personal items. He and his mother, Lynn, were in a full-blown Cold War. They lived under the same roof but didn't exchange a single word. When Lynn saw him packing, she said nothing, merely offered a cold sneer and slammed doors as she moved about the house. Leo sent a message asking when he planned to move. Not wanting to trouble him again, Caleb replied that he wasn't in a hurry and would wait until after he had officially left his job. A couple of days later, Leo was unexpectedly sent on a business trip to a distant city. He said he wouldn't be back for a while, which saved Caleb the trouble of making up an excuse for moving on his own. Finally, his last day at the office arrived. Caleb returned his computer and office supplies, signed the final form, and turned in his employee ID. He had taken his personal belongings home a few days prior, so he left empty-handed. His colleague, Chloe, had suggested a farewell lunch, but Caleb, feeling it was an unnecessary fuss, declined with an excuse. Chloe looked a little hurt. She told him that sometimes she thought he was fun and stood up for others, but other times she found him cold and distant. Caleb's throat felt tight. He didn't say anything. Perhaps he had wanted to leave for too long. He had hated the unchangeable environment and his own life for so long that the moment an opportunity arose, he wanted to escape without a backward glance, leaving everything, good and bad, behind. Chloe's final words to him were to come back and visit sometime. They both saw the truth in each other's eyes. Some goodbyes were final. Caleb moved out of his family home. As he carried the last box out of his bedroom, Lynn emerged from the kitchen, glanced at him, and then went back inside. Caleb opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He went to the entryway and put on his shoes. Just as he opened the front door, Lynn reappeared behind him. Her voice was cold as ice. "Go on, then. Once you leave, don't ever come back." Caleb froze for a second, then silently picked up the box and walked out. The click of the closing door shut everything else behind him. The rental was fully furnished. It only took him half a day to clean and arrange his belongings. He needed to buy some daily necessities, so after looking up the nearest supermarket and taking a shower, he headed out, intending to familiarize himself with the neighborhood. Spring in the city was fleeting, and the temperature had already climbed into the low 80s. It was mid-afternoon, the air warm and hazy. Caleb squinted against the sun, a hollow feeling settling in his chest. He was free, the sun was shining, but he was utterly alone. A hand holding a flyer suddenly appeared in front of him. A young woman asked if he wanted to participate in their bookstore's promotion and get a free custom bookmark. Caleb usually ignored street promotions, but her friendly tone, or perhaps his own boredom, made him stop. He asked what the event was. The employee enthusiastically explained that it was to promote their online reading platform. All he had to do was follow their social media page, submit his favorite literary quote through the latest event post, and they would create a beautiful bookmark for him to pick up at the store. Sensing his potential reluctance, she pointed behind her. "This is our store right here. You must live nearby. You can pick it up anytime you're passing by. And with the bookmark, you get a 5% discount on all future purchases." Behind her was a small storefront with Greenleaf Books written on the sign. Through the glass door, he could see rows of wooden bookshelves. A ginger tabby cat was sitting by the door, scratching its head with a hind leg. It had been a long time since he had read a book for pleasure. With that thought, Caleb took out his phone and scanned the QR code on the poster. The employee guided him to the event page. Seeing him hesitate while trying to think of a quote, she told him the event ran for 2 more days, so he had plenty of time. Caleb nodded, put his phone away, and waved goodbye. After walking a few steps, he took his phone out again. As if he had finally found something to talk about, he opened his message thread with Leo. Leo's job was clearly demanding, especially when he was traveling. It wasn't until that evening, as Caleb returned to his new apartment with shopping bags and a takeout container, that his phone buzzed. A message from Leo apologized for the delay, explaining he had been in meetings all afternoon. He then asked if Caleb had already moved. Caleb was surprised, wondering how Leo knew. He texted back asking how he had found out. Leo replied that the bookstore from the social media page Caleb had shared was located near the apartment they had looked at. Caleb sent back a series of periods, followed by the word impressive. Leo asked if everything had gone smoothly. Caleb confirmed that it had. He then reminded Leo that he hadn't answered his earlier question. Leo replied that he had a few favorite quotes, but since the bookmark was for Caleb, he wanted to make sure it was something he liked. Caleb texted back that it didn't matter. He hadn't read a non-work-related book in ages and would probably have to quote a textbook if he had to come up with something himself. Leo's reply was 1 second. A minute later, the screen went dark. Caleb put his phone down and started unpacking his takeout. Eating alone in his own space felt liberating yet desolate. The apartment was too quiet, a stark contrast to the lively sounds of a family cooking dinner in the unit above. A wave of melancholy washed over him. He felt bored and foolish for making such a big deal out of a silly promotional event, especially involving Leo. He wondered if Leo found it strange. A long while later, his phone chimed again. It was a message from Leo. He wrote that when he was in the States, he had read a short story with a line that had stayed with him. He had just looked up the translation. He asked if Caleb had ever heard of a story of a broken heart. Caleb put down his chopsticks and replied that he hadn't, and asked what the line was. A moment later, Leo sent the quote. "Some people think love is sex and marriage and 6 o'clock kisses and children, and perhaps it is, Miss Lester. But do you know what I think? I think love is a touch and yet not a touch." Caleb stared at the words until the screen dimmed. He woke it up again and typed a reply. He asked why that particular line, saying he never took Leo for such a sentimental person. Leo replied that he didn't know. When he read the story, that line just stuck with him. He then asked Caleb for his opinion. Caleb replied that it was nice and literary, and that it would do. But Leo clarified. He wasn't asking about the quote. He was asking what Caleb thought love was. Caleb typed back, asking why they were suddenly discussing such a profound topic. He said he didn't know. Leo pressed, asking if he had ever been in love with someone. Caleb typed yes, then moved the cursor and added no in front of it. His finger hovered over the send button, then he deleted the no. Finally, he deleted the yes as well. In the end, he sent back a non-committal 4 words. I don't remember. Leo didn't reply for a long time. Caleb assumed his evasive answer had ended the conversation. But a few minutes later, a new message arrived. Leo wrote that the bookstore event had reminded him of something. He recalled seeing Caleb at the school's bookstore one summer during elementary school. They both needed to buy the same book for a required reading list, and there was only one copy left. He said Caleb had let him have it. Caleb was surprised and tried to recall the memory, but drew a complete blank. He asked what grade they were in, admitting he had no recollection of it at all. He then added that he really didn't remember. Leo replied, asking if his previous "I don't remember" had been a lie. Caleb was cornered. He insisted that he was getting old and his memory was failing, so he truly didn't remember either event. Leo countered that it seemed unfair that he remembered something from the 3rd grade so clearly while Caleb didn't. Caleb asked why he even remembered it. Because, Leo replied, you said I could have the book, but I had to say something nice first. Caleb's mind was a complete jumble. He couldn't remember this at all. He asked suspiciously if Leo was making it up, protesting that he wasn't like that as a kid. Leo replied that he suspected Caleb had been watching too many TV shows. Caleb conceded the point and asked what he had said that made him give up the book. Leo's reply came a moment later. I said, you're my favorite person in the whole class. Caleb wished he could pry open his own skull and search for the memory. Leo had told him he liked him as a kid, and he had completely forgotten. He accused Leo of being a smooth talker even back then. They chatted about elementary school for a while longer before Caleb remembered that Leo wasn't idle like him. He asked, and Leo confirmed that he had just gotten back to his hotel and had more work to do. Feeling guilty for taking up so much of his time, Caleb brought the conversation to a close. He then went back to the Greenleaf Books page and submitted the quote Leo had sent him. In a new environment and a new bed, Caleb had expected to have trouble sleeping. But perhaps because of the day's physical exertion, he fell asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. He dreamed he was a thief. He climbed over a glass wall and broke into a living room. A man was sitting on a plush, dark gray sofa. The man saw him but showed no surprise or fear, simply smiling and beckoning him over. Suddenly feeling exhausted, Caleb walked over and curled up on a corner of the sofa. The man started to move closer, but Caleb woke with a start, watching him warily, a sharp knife clutched in his hand. The man acted as if nothing was wrong, gently stroking his forehead and inviting him to stay. Day by day, his hostility and paranoia began to fade. He felt uneasy and planned to leave quietly. But he discovered the glass walls had grown impossibly high. The man approached with a smile, telling him he couldn't leave. I built these walls, the man whispered in his ear. No one was ever meant to get in. But you did, so now you can't go. He looked up, meeting the man's clear eyes, which were partially hidden by dark hair. He suddenly asked, what do you think love is? The man whispered back, I already told you. Love is a touch and yet not a touch. Years of a strict work-week schedule meant Caleb woke up early the next morning anyway. There was no alarm, no sound of others moving about the house, only the sun rising, gradually brightening the curtains. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling, disoriented. It was a Monday, a day that should have been busy, but he could sleep in, leisurely go out for breakfast, and have a whole day to himself. Yet, the thought brought him no comfort or anticipation. He got out of bed, and after a moment, remembered something he could do today: pick up his bookmark. The same employee from yesterday was standing outside the bookstore. She smiled and greeted him, clearly remembering him. Caleb said he had submitted his quote last night and asked if the bookmark was ready. The employee scratched her head, unsure if it had been made that quickly. She said it wasn't a difficult process and suggested he go inside and ask the manager directly. Caleb nodded and pushed open the glass door. The bookstore manager was a woman in her 30s, wearing a long dress. She had a beauty mark on her chin and a charming smile. She was holding the ginger cat from the day before. Hearing Caleb's request, she smiled, placed the cat on the floor, and walked to the counter. She said they had made a batch that morning and his was probably among them. She asked for his phone number to verify. After he gave her the number, she checked her computer and confirmed it was there. She bent down and rummaged through a drawer behind the counter, then pulled out a dark blue card tied with a red ribbon and handed it to him. The bookmark was of decent quality, simple in design, with a few lines of text and a black orchid printed on it. The manager reminded him that the bookmark entitled him to a 5% discount on most books. Caleb smiled and twirled the bookmark, asking curiously if she wasn't worried about people faking them. The manager laughed. "Honey, it's a free bookmark. Why would I worry about counterfeits? If someone really goes to the trouble of making a perfect copy for a measly 5% discount, I'd say they've earned it." Then, as if remembering something, she covered her mouth with her hand and smiled. "Oh, right, I remember yours. Someone else submitted the exact same quote yesterday, around the same time you did." Caleb's eyes widened slightly. The manager, noticing his expression, gave him a knowing smile and a wink. She asked if it was someone he knew who also wanted an identical bookmark. Caleb guessed it must have been Leo. He just couldn't figure out why. Leo wasn't going to buy books here, and he certainly wasn't in need of a bookmark. What reason could he have for participating in such a silly promotion? Some people think love is sex and marriage and 6 o'clock kisses and a bunch of children. And perhaps it is, Miss Lester. But do you know what I think? I think love is a touch and yet not a touch. The manager slowly recited the words on the bookmark. Another identical one had appeared between her fingers. She leaned against the counter, sighing, "Ah, to be young." Caleb just smiled politely, clearly not understanding what she was getting at. The cat, which had wandered off, reappeared and rubbed against his leg, its tail flicking against his shoes. The manager watched with a grin. "She really likes you." Caleb looked down. When he moved his foot, the cat darted away. He shrugged, saying he couldn't tell. "Cats are proud animals," the manager said, walking out from behind the counter. She scooped the cat up into her arms and stroked its fur. "Even if she likes you, we have to be the ones to approach her first, to touch her, to show our affection. Only then will she come to us." After a few days of leisure at home, Caleb had to admit he wasn't used to this kind of life. But he couldn't think of anything he wanted to do. Logically, he should be looking for his next job, but whenever he tried to open a job search website, he felt an inexplicable restlessness and would close the browser within minutes. He told himself his mood hadn't fully recovered and decided to give himself a few more days off. For some reason, he thought of the archery range Leo had taken him to. When Caleb walked into Phoenix Archery Club again, it was a weekday, and the range was much quieter than his last visit. He didn't understand the payment system. His first time with Leo had felt like visiting a private club where everything was free. He assumed it was due to Leo's long-standing membership. He walked past the entrance toward the equipment counter. The employee was different from the one he'd met before. Seeing Caleb's uncertain expression, she politely asked if this was his first time. To save time, Caleb said yes and asked about the rates. The employee explained the options for non-members, which involved buying vouchers for sets of 10 arrows. He could also purchase a membership card for discounted rates. Caleb nodded and said he'd buy 6 vouchers, paying with his phone. He then requested a 22-pound bow. He took the bow and gear upstairs. With fewer people, several of the 10-yard lanes were open. He handed his vouchers to an employee monitoring the range and was directed to a lane in the middle. The employee asked if he needed instructions. Caleb, already strapping on his gear like a pro, just smiled and shook his head. Seeing he wasn't a beginner, the employee gave a brief safety reminder and left. As he went to knock an arrow, Caleb frowned in hesitation. Did the arrow go on the left side of the bow or the right? He thought he would have remembered the form after practicing for so long, but now the details were fuzzy. With a sigh, he glanced over at a person shooting in the next lane, discreetly observing them to fill in the missing pieces of his memory. He knew the first arrow was off the moment he released it. Sure enough, it hit the outermost ring of the target. At least it hadn't landed on someone else's target this time. On his last visit, Leo had patiently coached him, correcting his aim so that as long as his posture was right, the arrows flew true. Now, on his own, he realized that aiming was a huge challenge in itself. His first instinct was to text Leo, but he remembered his friend was busy with work. Instead, he turned to the internet for help. He muttered the instructions he found online about adjusting his sights. Shoot high, aim high. Shoot low, aim low. He drew the bow again. After several attempts, his arrows started to group within the scoring rings, but he still couldn't hit the bullseye. Before he knew it, only one arrow remained in his quiver. This was his last set. He was beginning to understand why Leo had recommended this sport. When he focused on that single point in the distance, all other distractions faded away. His mind, usually a chaotic mess of emotions, finally grew quiet. Although he hadn't hit the center yet, each arrow that landed closer to the bullseye boosted his confidence. He felt that taming the bow was just a matter of time. The feeling, though long absent, was familiar. If I can just hit it, Caleb licked his dry lips. A long-forgotten ambition stirred within him, sparking a sudden, strange thought. He tensed his muscles, slowly drawing the string. The tip of the arrow seemed to hold a sharp point of light, aimed directly at the red heart of the target. If I can hit it, he released his fingers. The bow hummed, and the arrow flew. Maybe I can. With a satisfying thud, the final arrow embedded itself in the 10 ring. As if on cue, his phone chimed with a notification. A message from Leo. I'm back in town. 2 identical dark blue bookmarks lay on the polished black tabletop, glowing orange under the restaurant's crystal chandelier. After fiddling with them for a moment, Caleb put one away. His phone vibrated with a new message from Leo, apologizing and saying he would be there in 15 minutes, and that Caleb should go ahead and order. Caleb waved over a server and placed their order. 15 minutes later, Leo rushed in, a light sheen of sweat on his forehead. His suit jacket was slung casually over his arm, and the cuffs of his shirt were unbuttoned and rolled up, revealing strong, lean forearms. He apologized again before he even sat down, saying he was sorry for making Caleb wait so long and that dinner was on him. Caleb feigned annoyance, reminding Leo that he had already promised to treat him. He told his friend not to worry about it. He wasn't a client, and waiting a little while was no big deal. He added that if he had known how busy Leo was, He would have suggested they meet on the weekend. Leo still looked apologetic. He explained that he'd been waiting for over an hour. The project he had been traveling for was finished, but a last-minute, urgent proposal request had come in right at the end of the workday, and then he'd hit traffic on the way over. He rubbed his forehead with a weary smile. Caleb looked at him sympathetically, asking if that meant he had to work more later. Leo explained that he didn't. They had just finished a quick meeting, and a junior associate would prepare the materials. He would just need to review them over the weekend before sending them to his boss. Since Caleb had ordered ahead, their food arrived shortly after. A huge wooden platter laden with various German sausages, pork knuckle, and ribs was set between them. Caleb gestured to it and said, "It's all meat." Leo rested his forehead in his hand and laughed softly. He snapped his fingers to call the server back and ordered 2 large dark beers. Caleb asked if he hadn't driven. He had considered ordering the restaurant's famous beer but had refrained, assuming Leo would be driving. Leo shook his head, explaining that his car was subject to road space rationing today, so he had taken a cab. They were both hungry and ate in silence for a while before resuming their conversation. Caleb wiped his mouth and hands, then pushed the bookmark that had been under his phone across the table. He mentioned that the bookstore manager had told him someone had submitted the same quote right after he did, and he figured it was Leo. He'd picked up his for him. Leo's gaze flickered. He took the bookmark, glanced at it, and then looked up with a smile. "Right. Thanks." He offered no further explanation. Caleb couldn't contain his curiosity any longer and blurted out, "Are you short on bookmarks?" Leo, who was raising his glass, paused. He pressed his lips together and then nodded. "I am." Caleb found the answer baffling but couldn't pinpoint why. He just nodded and took a sip of his beer. A comfortable silence settled between them. It was Leo who spoke first, asking if Caleb had ended up choosing that quote as well. Caleb propped his chin on his hand, explaining that he hadn't really chosen it. He had just participated in the event on a whim and had simply used the line Leo sent him. He felt a bit foolish, realizing they were spending several minutes discussing such a trivial matter. He wondered if Leo was just trying to make conversation because they had run out of things to talk about. The thought made him frown, and he studied Leo's face. Leo noticed his expression and asked what was wrong. Caleb, trying to start a more interesting topic, found his mind blank. He ended up asking, "Was your business trip fun?" Leo's expression turned wry. He raised an eyebrow and asked with a smile, "Are you trying to make small talk with me now?" Caleb felt a flush of embarrassment. "No." Just then, the restaurant's lights dimmed. A spotlight hit a corner of the room, illuminating a young black man with a microphone. Behind him, a band was set up in the shadows. Caleb remembered reading reviews about this place. He explained to Leo that at a certain time in the evening, the restaurant turned into a sort of bar with a live band. As he spoke, the singer smiled at the audience and, accompanied by an electric guitar, began to sing. Caleb rested his chin on his hand, tapping his fingers on the table. He remarked that the song was very familiar and asked if Leo knew it. Leo, like a walking encyclopedia, smiled and provided the answer. "Shape of My Heart, the NCRS song from The Professional." "Yes, that's it." Caleb snapped his fingers, pleased to have placed it. He said he used to have it on his old MP3 player and began to hum along with the melody. When the song ended, the restaurant erupted in applause. A young white man walked up with a guitar, handed it to the singer, and gave him a hug. They then shared a brief, natural kiss. Caleb's eyes widened. Whistles and applause came from a few tables. The singer, seemingly unfazed, took the guitar and started the next song. Caleb turned back to find Leo looking at him. Leo raised an eyebrow and asked if this was a common sight in London. Caleb joked that in London, heterosexuals were the minority. He added that it was much less common back home. Even if it happened, it was rarely so open as the general level of acceptance was lower. So what's your take on it? The light was dim, and Leo's gaze seemed to be fixed on Caleb's face. Caleb thought to himself, I'm one of them, what kind of take can I have? But he couldn't say that out loud. He just shrugged nonchalantly. I don't have a take. It's just a different sexual orientation, like how some people prefer dogs and some prefer cats. Leo seemed to laugh, but the sound was lost in the surrounding noise. He said suddenly, a guy confessed to me in college. Caleb silently cursed the shameless bastard but managed to force a smile. That must have been awkward for you. Awkward? Leo shook his head. Not really. Just surprising. Because the guy had a girlfriend. This time, Caleb couldn't hide his shock. Leo was amused by his reaction and continued, I asked him if he was bisexual. He said he wasn't. He had always thought he was straight until he met me. Caleb finally understood. He rolled his eyes discreetly. Is he trying to show off how his charm can turn straight guys? Of course not, Leo said, tilting his head slightly, his gaze shifting past Caleb to the singer. It just made me realize that maybe sexual orientation is just a label our world needs to categorize people. In reality, feelings like attraction or love, they don't have a gender. Caleb looked down and took a long drink of beer, a silent humph muffled by the glass. The diners gradually left, and the restaurant grew louder, the band switching to a more rock-oriented style. Trays of beer and colorful cocktails began to circulate, and the atmosphere shifted completely into that of a bar. On Caleb and Leo's table, 2 glasses of lemon water and a fruit platter stood out as an island of sobriety amidst the sea of alcohol and fried food. They both silently picked at the fruit, unable to talk over the noise from the table behind them. A group of college-aged kids had taken over a long table and were now loudly playing a drinking game. So cliché, Caleb thought. I got the king. A girl shrieked. I pick number 6 and number 7. Number 6 has to confess their love to number 7 in the most over-the-top way, and number 7 has to reject them in the harshest way possible. Immature, Caleb added to his mental critique. Leo had clearly overheard. He looked at Caleb's eye-rolling expression and asked with amusement, What's your expert opinion? No expert opinion, Caleb said with a roguish grin. Just a shame they don't understand the essence of the game. The point is to create maximum awkwardness and humiliation for others. The demands should be far more embarrassing than that. A confession and a rejection isn't embarrassing? Caleb waved his hand dismissively. It's obviously fake. The only thing that's truly humiliating is when a real confession gets rejected. Leo's expression was non-committal. You don't believe me? Here, I'll show you, Caleb said, the words tumbling out. But as he spoke, an idea sparked in his mind. An idea that, once born, was impossible to suppress. Show me what? Leo asked, confused. The smile on Caleb's face faded. He met Leo's eyes and, after a moment of silence, spoke. There's something you probably don't know. I never thought I'd say this out loud. But after meeting you again, I want to tell you my secret. The truth is, I've always had feelings for you. I dream about you. I want to spend every day and night with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I don't know if you can accept these feelings, Leo. Leo stared at him, stunned. Caleb held his gaze for 2 seconds, then looked down. When he looked up again, his familiar smile was back, but the hand under the table was clenched into a tight fist. All right, he said, clearing his throat. Confession's over. Your turn to reject me. Leo's brow furrowed. He pressed his lips together, his throat working. He opened his mouth. I'm sorry. The smile on Caleb's face didn't waver. He even gave a casual lift of his eyebrow, as if he had his comeback all prepared. Leo closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry. Can't refuse. At first, Caleb thought he had misheard over the noise. He blinked, trying to ask what Leo had just said, but no sound would come out. He tried to force a casual, joking smile, but his facial muscles wouldn't obey. He knew he hadn't misheard. He had heard every single word clearly. His mind was a chaotic mess, like a bomb had gone off, leaving his thoughts completely scrambled. After uttering those words, Leo fell silent as well. After what felt like an eternity, Caleb managed to speak, his voice hoarse. Are you joking with me? The only answer was Leo's deep, unwavering gaze. Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face and turned away. He pushed himself up from the table, his wrist trembling slightly. I'm going to the restroom. He had taken only one step when a hand clamped down on his wrist. But just as quickly, Leo let go. Okay, he said softly. I'll wait for you here. Caleb fled. He grabbed a passing server, asked for directions, and hurried away. Splashing cold water on his face did little to cool the heat that suffused his skin. He braced himself against the sink and looked up. In the water-spattered mirror, he saw a face flushed red from his cheekbones to his earlobes. Could it really be possible? The person he had secretly liked for so long, a man, could actually like him back? A paranoid thought flickered through his mind. Had he somehow given himself away, prompting Leo to play a cruel joke on him? He immediately dismissed it. Leo wasn't that kind of person. Caleb felt like a caged animal, a frantic energy coursing through him. When he pushed open the restroom door and saw Leo leaning against the wall waiting, the anxiety peaked. What are you doing here? He asked, his tone sharp with an unconscious defensiveness. Leo straightened up at the sight of him and gave a self-deprecating smile. Sorry, I couldn't just sit there. I wanted to wait for you somewhere closer. They moved to a quieter spot at the end of the hallway. They stood facing each other, Leo's eyes shining with a mixture of hope and tenderness, as if awaiting a verdict. Caleb avoided his gaze again, took a deep breath, and asked, You like me? I like you, Leo answered with complete seriousness. A muscle in Caleb's jaw twitched. He felt trapped in a vortex of self-doubt and confusion. Why didn't I notice? If you really like me, why did I have to be the one to confess first? How am I supposed to believe you're not just messing with me? You confessed to me first? Leo repeated, his eyes sparkling. So you're saying that wasn't a joke? That those were your real feelings? Is that your answer for me? Having accidentally revealed the truth behind his joke, Caleb felt as if his last line of defense had crumbled. Leo, he said, his hands clenched behind his back. He was still staring at the patterned wallpaper. I admit it. I like you. When you say that, could you please not address the wall? Leo's voice was laced with a soft, amused tone. He took a step closer, reaching out to touch Caleb's chin. Caleb jerked his head back, dodging his hand. He continued slowly, I thought we would always just be friends. Even though I like you, if you hadn't said what you did tonight, that's all we would have ever been. You're smart and you're proud. You can't deny it because I used to be the same way. People like us, we never risk getting hurt over something uncertain. You didn't answer my questions before, so let me ask you just one now. The answer you wanted from me tonight, you already knew it, didn't you? Leo was silent, but his expression was all the confirmation Caleb needed. I thought, I hid it so well, Caleb said with a bitter laugh. I can't believe you saw through it. I wasn't completely sure, Leo said, his gaze still intense. Sometimes I wondered if it was just my imagination. I know what you're thinking, but have you ever considered that without some sign from you, I was also afraid? Afraid that if I made a move, you'd push me away or even be disgusted. How could I risk that? Is that so? So now that you're 70–80% sure, you see an opportunity and you make your move. What if I hadn't given you this chance? What if I had kept it a secret forever? Caleb felt like he was possessed. A part of him was screaming to stop, but the words kept spilling out, unfiltered. Leo looked at Caleb, a flicker of bewilderment on his face. He didn't understand what was happening inside Caleb's head. So he answered honestly, yes. If I hadn't seen a possibility, I wouldn't have said anything. We would have just remained classmates. A fog of disappointment clouded Caleb's eyes. He took a step back. Leo, not a man of flowery words, felt a surge of helplessness, as if the harder he tried, the further he pushed Caleb away. A hint of hurt crept into his voice. So what should I have done? Pursued you blindly? You gave me no hope, yet you expected me to charge ahead and risk everything? You say you never noticed I liked you. Isn't that because you didn't want to see it because you were afraid to? Meanwhile, I had to analyze every look, every gesture, every word from you, searching for the slightest possibility. And even after all that, you still think my feelings for you are less than yours for me? Caleb, you're a coward. You have no idea. Caleb retorted, his instincts taking over. For someone like you, it's 100 times easier to believe someone likes you. He stopped mid-sentence, finally seeing the faint redness rimming Leo's eyes. It was like a hammer blow to his chest. What were they doing? His years-long crush was finally reciprocated, a mutual confession, and he had turned it into this ugly confrontation. He had only seen his own feelings, forgetting that Leo had his pride, too. He himself hadn't dared to take the first step, but Leo had. Wasn't that enough? Leo was already regretting his harsh words. So when Caleb reached out, he was too surprised to react. Caleb grabbed the collar of his shirt, pulled him closer, and pressed his lips against his. It was a brief, warm, wet touch. Leo unconsciously licked his lips, staring at Caleb in a daze. I'm sorry, Caleb said, his gaze darting around awkwardly. His brow was still furrowed in a pained expression. Just assume I was having a meltdown. Leo belatedly raised a hand to his own lips. So, is that your answer? Caleb looked like he was about to turn and run. Leo grabbed his wrist again, but this time he held on tight, pressing Caleb's hand against his own chest. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, Caleb could feel the rapid, heavy beat of his heart. Leo stepped closer, wrapping his arms around him in a gentle hug. He whispered by his ear, "You nearly gave me a heart attack." "I'm sorry," Caleb said again, not knowing what else to say. He hugged him back, burying his face in the crook of his neck. "That's not what I want to hear." The taxi door opened, and Caleb got out. He bent down and gave a deliberately casual wave to Leo inside. "All right, get some rest." Leo nodded, then suddenly asked, "Can I see you tomorrow?" "Huh?" Caleb looked momentarily blank, then processed the question. Yeah, sure. What are we doing?" Leo raised his eyebrows, a hint of surprise in his smile. "Does it have to be for something?" "Well, then," as Caleb struggled for a response, the taxi driver called out impatiently from the front, asking if they were going or not. "We're going," Caleb shouted back. He then shot a quick wink at Leo. "Gotta go. We'll talk later. Bye." He slammed the door shut before Leo could reply and stood on the curb, watching the taxi drive away. He let out a long breath into the night air. For some reason, he felt an urge to just sit down on the sidewalk and do nothing. Up ahead, the taxi, which had only gone 100 yards or so, suddenly stopped. A moment later, the back door opened, and a figure got out. Caleb's eyes widened. The taxi sped away, leaving the man standing alone on the street, facing him from a distance. The streetlight cast long shadows at their feet. The late spring air was filled with the faint scent of unseen flowers. The world seemed to fall silent. Though it was only a shadow moving through the dappled light of the trees, Caleb felt as if he could hear footsteps on dry leaves, each one landing squarely on his heart. Leo walked up to him, one hand in his pocket, his jacket slung over the other arm. He stopped, his clear eyes filled with the gentle quiet of the spring night. He looked at Caleb but said nothing. Caleb felt his heart begin to race again, an unfamiliar ache spreading behind his eyes. He didn't know what was causing this feeling, but he pushed it down and asked casually, "What's up?" Leo lowered his gaze slightly. "I forgot something," he said softly. "You could have just texted or called," Caleb said, unable to meet his eyes. "So what did you forget?" "I forgot to walk you to your door." Caleb finally raised a hand to cover his hot face, squeezing out a few words through his teeth. "Don't say that. Let's just go." Leo murmured his agreement. He took his hand out of his pocket and fell into step behind Caleb. The short walk from the complex entrance to his building suddenly felt incredibly long. It was late, and the lights in the flower beds cast dim, shifting shadows. They walked side by side, each lost in their own thoughts, neither speaking. The only contact was the occasional brush of their hands as they swung by their sides. It was Leo who finally broke the silence. He lightly touched Caleb's palm with his fingers, a tentative, questioning gesture. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He discreetly wiped his hand on his pants, feeling for sweat that wasn't there, and then reached out and took hold of Leo's pinky finger. "I'm still not quite used to this," Caleb explained awkwardly. "Going from classmates to, Leo seemed to relax a little, a smile playing on his lips. "How long do you think you'll need to get used to it?" Caleb, still pinching his finger, found the position incredibly strange and let go. He hesitated. One night, Leo let out a soft laugh. When he had composed himself, he reached out, took Caleb's hand properly, and interlaced their fingers. He turned to look at him. "You're a liar. I don't recall who was it that initiated a kiss earlier. You bring that up again and I swear I'll initiate a punch," Caleb threatened darkly. Leo held up his free hand in surrender. "All right, this is my building," Caleb said, stopping. He indicated that Leo could head back now. 703, right? Leo looked up at the building, then back at Caleb with a smile, tightening his grip on his hand. "Doesn't seem that high?" After a few seconds of silence, a soft sound of agreement escaped Caleb's throat. When Caleb finally lay down in his soft bed after ending his last text exchange with Leo, it was nearly 2 a.m. Instead of taking the perfectly good elevator, they had foolishly climbed 7 flights of stairs. He'd had to wash his sweaty hair, which was still damp. Sleepiness began to creep in, his eyelids growing heavy, but his mind remained stubbornly awake. So much had happened in one night. Caleb was afraid he would wake up the next day to find it had all been a dream. He held his hand up in front of his face, the skin still tingling with a phantom warmth and the memory of a firm grip. His long-held crush had been reciprocated. He should have been ecstatic. But as the tide of excitement receded, it left behind a messy shoreline of anxiety and doubt. He had long accepted that lucky breaks and miracles just didn't happen to him. He had made peace with his failures and had never expected his life to change so drastically. Until today, neither of them was quite sure how things had progressed so quickly. Caleb found himself pinned to the sofa, Leo's hands in his hair, the quiet room filled only with their heavy breathing and the wet, intimate sounds of their kisses. A laptop on the coffee table was knocked aside by Caleb's foot, teetering precariously on the edge, but neither of them paid it any mind. In fact, when Leo had arrived earlier with a bag full of groceries, Caleb had assumed their day would consist of a cozy home-cooked meal and a movie. And indeed, a pot of beef stew was simmering on the stove, thawed steaks were waiting by the microwave, and a movie had just finished playing on the laptop. But all of that was now forgotten. Their first kisses were clumsy. Leo, as he'd admitted, had no experience, and Caleb, though he had some, was afraid to show it, letting Leo take the lead. But perhaps two people who liked each other didn't need much technique, or perhaps Leo was a natural. Soon enough, Caleb's mind was a complete blur, lost in the kiss. Wait, Caleb pushed at Leo but couldn't move him. He managed to pull back just enough to get a word out before Leo followed, his hand on the back of his neck, pulling him into another kiss. Caleb's hand rested on Leo's cheek. He couldn't tell whose skin was hotter. He managed to mumble a few words against Leo's lips, something about the stove still being on. Leo finally eased up, resting his forehead against Caleb's. He placed one last, gentle peck on the corner of his mouth. Neither could catch their breath. Caleb became aware of their awkward position. One of his legs was hooked over Leo's thigh, while one of Leo's hands cupped his neck and the other roamed his lower back. Their bodies were pressed tightly together, and it was obvious they were both aroused. The thought that Leo would never be the submissive one shot through Caleb's mind, and the realization was enough to cool his ardor. He gave the man on top of him a serious push. Leo complied, leaning back against the sofa, though his eyes remained fixed on Caleb. Caleb stood up. "I'll go turn off the stove. You want to handle the steaks?" Leo, still holding onto his pinky finger, gave him a half smile. "You know," he said, his voice low and raspy, "I don't think I'm hungry for food right now." Caleb was so turned on he wanted to drag him to the bedroom right then and there. But the progression felt too fast. After harboring a secret crush for so many years, he felt they should probably have a few months of chaste romance first. Seeing Caleb's resolve, Leo sighed, took his hand, and stood up, pulling him toward the kitchen. Though both had studied abroad, their cooking skills were worlds apart. After one taste of Caleb's stew, Leo politely asked him to leave the kitchen. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching Leo expertly tenderize the steaks. He tried to defend himself, asking Leo if he knew what the world's thinnest book was. Leo, without looking up, humored him with a non-committal "A book of British recipes," Caleb declared, pleased with his own joke. He then added that a gentleman should stay out of the kitchen. Leo paused what he was doing and sighed. "I finally understand why your literature grades were so bad." Caleb pouted and retreated to the living room. The smell of food and the clatter of utensils drifted from the kitchen. Caleb leaned back on the sofa, staring blankly at the coffee table. Felt like a dream. He felt like he had fast-forwarded through his own life, skipping too many scenes to arrive at this point. It felt borrowed, stolen, and it left a deep-seated unease he couldn't quite name. Leo emerged from the kitchen with 2 plates and asked if he had any forks and knives. Caleb, shaking himself out of his stupor, said he should and got up to look. Leo followed him into the kitchen and gave him a searching look. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb jumped, thinking Leo had read his mind. "Never mind. Chopsticks are fine," Leo said with a smile, taking the chopsticks from his hand. He must have misinterpreted Caleb's distraction. He leaned in and kissed the corner of his mouth. "We'll continue after dinner," he murmured. Caleb nearly fell to his knees. They sat facing each other at the small table. Suddenly, Leo laughed. Caleb looked at him quizzically. "I was just thinking how strange life is," Leo said. "We only reconnected a few months ago. Back then, I couldn't even get you to agree to have a meal with me. And now, here we are eating together like this." Caleb felt a flicker of disorientation, realizing just how much had changed in 3 short months. Leo watched him intently. "After all that, you don't have any questions for me?" Caleb wasn't sure what he was getting at. "Not at the moment." Leo raised an eyebrow, a look of mock disappointment on his face. "All right then, let me ask you, did you have a crush on me back then?" Caleb's heart skipped a beat. "Why would you ask that?" he asked reflexively. "Just answer the question. Does it matter?" "It matters," Leo said, his gaze serious. Caleb bit his lip and finally admitted it. "Yes." Leo's brow relaxed, a smile spreading across his face. "Good. So it wasn't a one-sided crush after all." "What?" Caleb said, his mouth falling open in disbelief. Leo cleared his throat, a little embarrassed to admit his own youthful feelings. "Actually, I liked you in elementary school. Not like that, I'm not a creep. I just thought you were interesting and wanted to be your friend. But you always had your own group of friends. It wasn't until high school that I realized I was gay. And the person who made me realize it was you." Caleb suppressed the urge to cheer out loud, struggling to keep his voice calm. "But I had no idea in high school." "Neither did you," Leo said with a smile. "I don't know if we were both just clueless back then, or really good actors. We wasted so many years. After graduation, you didn't come to the class reunion. I heard you went abroad and then I lost touch. I thought maybe it just wasn't meant to be. So when I saw you again, I was genuinely surprised. I thought maybe this was my second chance and I had to at least try." Caleb opened his mouth, 1,000 things he wanted to say, but he didn't know where to start. Leo continued, "In college, I tried to date other people. But whenever I met someone, I'd inevitably compare them to you, and it never worked out. I read a lot of psychology books trying to figure out if it was just stubbornness or laziness or some kind of psychological effect. But the day I saw you again at your office, I suddenly realized, maybe I was waiting for you. Maybe I was waiting for you." Caleb knew what kind of person Leo was. Rational, intelligent. He was the type to prioritize his career over love, the type to retreat to being just classmates if there was no hope. He spoke in terms of chances, tries, and maybes. Passionate, impulsive declarations were not his style. And yet, he had calmly said, "For all these years, maybe I was waiting for you." This was the greatest depth of feeling he could probably express. Caleb buried his face in his hands, pressing against his tired eyes. He wanted to say, "I was waiting for you, too," but the words wouldn't come. Was he waiting for Leo? He didn't know. He had liked him in high school and had dreamed of him over the years, but he had never expected to see him again. He had even dated someone else in college. If Leo hadn't been so much like his old self when they reconnected, he probably would have just remembered him as a high school crush, not fallen for him all over again. That couldn't be called waiting. Seeing his conflicted expression, Leo reassured him. "Don't overthink it. I'm not asking for you to have felt the same way in the past. Just knowing you liked me then, and that you like me now is enough to make me happy." Caleb suddenly wanted to ask, "The you who liked me back then, were you waiting for the me from back then, too?" But he knew he shouldn't ask. He just waved his hand and said, "All right, let's drop it. Any more talk about liking, and we're gonna sound like a sappy romance novel." Don't worry about that, Leo said, taking his hand. He stood up from the table and leaned over Caleb, a slight curve to his lips. I'm more interested in an American drama kind of storyline. Caleb only had time to utter a confused syllable before his voice was smothered. Like I said, Leo murmured against his lips. We'll continue after dinner. They had planned to go for a walk in the afternoon, but a work call from Leo changed their plans. He spent a long time on the phone, rubbing his temples. I know. My laptop isn't with me. I'll email you in an hour. Schedule a conference call after 5. It's fine. It's my job. After hanging up, he looked at Caleb with an expression of pure helplessness. Caleb tossed the jacket he had just put on back onto the sofa and clapped him on the shoulder, joking, "All right, you can go now. Your job requires a truly heartbreaking amount of overtime. So eager to get rid of me, huh?" Leo said, wrapping an arm around his waist. Caleb quickly put a hand on his chest. Stop. You have 59 minutes left." Leo, who had been teasing him, let go and resumed his serious expression. "Then I'm leaving." Caleb walked him to the door. As he watched him bend down to put on his shoes, he had the bizarre thought that he was the mistress and Leo's job was the wife. The thought made him chuckle. "What are you laughing at?" Leo asked. Caleb shook his head. "Nothing. Just remember to bring your laptop next time." Leo straightened up, his back to Caleb. He said casually, "How about I move in with you?" Caleb's laughter died in his throat. He stared, wide-eyed. "Move in?" "Yeah," Leo said, turning around, his eyes bright and clear, a smile playing on his lips. "Would you welcome me?" Caleb assumed Leo was joking. After all, he was a local. There was no reason for him to cram into a one-bedroom apartment with an old classmate, especially when it wasn't even close to his office. He didn't take it seriously. That evening, when Leo brought it up again during a video call, Caleb jokingly replied, "Sure, just bring yourself and an extra pillow. Rent's on me." But he forgot that Leo was a man of action. On Monday morning, a pillow was delivered to his apartment. Caleb wanted to call Leo and ask what was going on, but he didn't want to disturb him at work. Instead, he took a picture of the pillow and texted it with the message, "What's this?" Around noon, Leo replied, "You said to bring an extra pillow, right?" He followed up with, "By the way, I shipped some of my things yesterday. You should get another package this afternoon. Can you sign for it for me? And then also, could you ask about a parking spot?" Caleb stared at his phone in shock. He couldn't believe this was happening. He had to call him. Leo answered quickly. He was probably at a restaurant as the background was noisy. He asked Caleb to wait a moment, then moved to a quieter place. "What's up?" Caleb was suddenly at a loss for words. "Are you serious? Do you think I'm not serious about you?" Leo's voice was tinged with laughter. "I'm just now realizing what a smartass you are," Caleb said, rubbing his forehead. "You know what I mean. Are you really moving in? Look at this place. Is there even room for 2 people? And what about your family?" Leo calmly replied, "I think the space is fine. I'm not picky. I was more worried you wouldn't want me here. You said you'd welcome me. As for my family, don't worry. They're pretty relaxed. They know I'm moving in with a friend, and they're fine with it." Caleb was speechless. He finally came up with another objection. "But don't you think this is all moving a little too fast?" "Too fast?" Leo laughed softly on the other end of the line. "How many years have we missed? You think this is fast? I think it's too slow. I can never get that time back." Caleb fell silent. He finally sighed in defeat. "Is there anything you need me to buy for you at the supermarket?" After Leo moved in, Caleb realized he was incredibly disciplined in his daily life. Even if he worked late, he would wake up early the next morning to go for a run, buy breakfast, and then wake Caleb up. Caleb, who had gotten used to sleeping in, found this particularly painful. He would sit up in bed, rubbing his eyes, as Leo pulled back the curtains and wished him a cheerful good morning. Leo would just laugh, ruffle his messy hair, and gently remind him that breakfast was on the table and would get cold soon. Caleb, who had stayed up late playing video games while Leo worked, compared their energy levels and grumbled, "You have way too much energy for a young person." Leo gave him a meaningful look. "I have nowhere to spend it." Caleb's brain, still sluggish from sleep, took a moment to understand. A morning erection, already present, became more pronounced. In the few days since Leo had moved in, they had slept in the same bed, but had done nothing more than talk. Leo had been too busy, and Caleb had his own reservations about initiating anything. So far, their relationship hadn't progressed beyond kissing. Caleb wasn't sure what Leo was thinking, but on the surface, he seemed very self-controlled. He might make flirtatious comments, but his actions were always respectful. Caleb had even secretly wondered if it was because he had no dating experience and didn't know how to take the next step with another man. So now, assuming Leo was just teasing him, he patted his shoulder and said lightly, "Looks like your workload isn't enough to burn off all that excess energy." He then threw back the covers and headed to the bathroom under Leo's watchful gaze. At breakfast, Caleb was still yawning. Leo watched him for a moment and then said, "You should come running with me tomorrow." "No, thanks," Caleb said with a laugh and a wave of his hand. "That's not my thing." Leo nodded, not pushing the issue. He then asked, "So what are your plans now?" "What?" Caleb was momentarily confused. "I mean, for work," Leo said, his gaze gentle. "I could tell you were in a bad place for a while. I don't know why, and I'll wait for you to tell me. But I want you to get back on your feet. I'll be here with you." He placed his hand over Caleb's, his grip soft but firm. Faced with Leo's earnest, clear eyes, Caleb could only nod. "Don't worry, I'll think about work." After Leo left, Caleb opened his laptop in the bedroom. Faced with a dizzying array of job search websites, he let out a long sigh. The cursor hovered over the search fields, unmoving. He had no idea what he wanted to do, what he could do. He felt like he was facing a checkmate in the game of life. No amount of time would help him find the next move unless he could take back his previous ones. When did he make the first wrong move? The day he failed his college entrance exams? The day his parents divorced? Probably even earlier. It started with his mother's constant nagging to be the best, to not embarrass them. It started with relatives and teachers praising him as a clever troublemaker with a bright future. It started before his parents even realized their own mediocrity and pinned all their hopes on their newborn son. And when it all came crashing down, the people who had praised and supported him were gone. No one could accept his failure, not even himself. He was standing on a cliff. All he had to do was jump, and he could be remade into one of the faceless masses. Logic told him to jump. What was the alternative? To cling to his ridiculous pride? But a voice inside him kept screaming, "I'm not willing to accept this." "And what if you're not?" Caleb sneered at himself. He closed his eyes, exhausted, and finally shoved the laptop aside, sinking into the soft mattress. In his dream, he was back in the exam room. The silence, the tension, the rows of students writing furiously, the stern proctor, the sunlight streaming through the window, the sudden chirping of cicadas. Caleb held his pen, staring at the last question. He suddenly realized where he had gone wrong. He had seen this problem before. He wouldn't make the same mistake again. Just before the bell rang, he finished. He had corrected every mistake. The air was hot, and sweat trickled down his face. The proctor walked up to his desk. He smiled up at him, waiting for his paper to be collected. But the voice from above said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Caleb looked down in a panic and saw he was wearing his work clothes, a shirt and dress pants. He looked nothing like a student. The proctor took his paper, drew a large red X across it, and wrote, "Not qualified to take this exam." The other students looked up, whispering amongst themselves. A wave of despair washed over him. But then, a familiar ringtone pulled him from the nightmare. Caleb opened his eyes with a frown, realizing he had fallen asleep. His phone on the desk was ringing. He got up, grabbed it, and saw it was Leo. He lay back down and answered. Leo was perceptive. "Sorry, were you sleeping? Did I wake you?" "It's fine," Caleb said, clearing his throat. "What's up?" "I left a flash drive at home. It should be next to where my laptop was yesterday. It has a file I urgently need. Could you find it and bring it to me?" For Leo to ask for such a favor, it must be important. Caleb immediately said, "I see it. I'll leave now. Send me your office address." Leo told him there was no rush and to be careful. He could hear someone in the background call Leo's English name. He spoke to them briefly, then returned to the phone, saying he had a meeting now, so Caleb should just text him when he arrived. He ended the call by reminding him again to be careful. Caleb hung up and got out of bed. He was still a little sweaty from his nap. He decided to wash his face and change into clean clothes before heading out. He took a taxi to the address Leo had sent. Leo's law firm was in a prestigious skyscraper in the heart of the city's new central business district. A blast of cold air hit him as he entered the sleek, bright lobby. He leaned against the visitor registration desk and texted Leo, "I'm here, first floor lobby." Leo replied quickly, "I can't get away right now. Could you bring it up?" 21st floor. Caleb put his phone away and smiled at the receptionist behind the desk.